How can we add these fractions together? First, let's check if the denominators are the same. Notice how this fraction has a denominator of 2, and this fraction has a denominator of 2 as well. So that means since the denominators are the same, we're allowed to add these fractions together. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the numerators and we're going to add them together. 3 plus 5 is 8. So that means the numerator is going to be 8, but the denominator, we're going to leave alone. We're not going to add them. The denominator is going to stay 2. Now recall how fractions are the same thing as division. So 8 over 2 is the same thing as 8 divided by 2. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. So that means 8 over 2 is 4. So 4 is our final answer. Let's try 4 over 5 plus 3 over 10. What should we do? Notice how the denominators are different, so that means we can't add them yet. So what we're going to do is make the denominators the same. So we have to find the lowest common denominator. So let's make a chart. This is the first number, this is the second number, the third number, fourth number, fifth number, and we can stop here. Let's start with the first number, which is this denominator. Now we're going to add it to itself by itself. So we're going to add 5. 5 plus 5 is 10. And now we're going to add it by itself. 10 plus 5 is 15. And now we're going to add it by itself. 15 plus 5 is 20. 20 plus 5 is 25. Now let's take the second denominator. The second denominator is 10. And we're going to add it by itself. So 10 plus 10, which is itself, is 20. And now we're going to add it by itself again. 20 plus 10 is 30. 30 plus 10 is 40. 40 plus 10 is 50. And now we're going to look at these two rows and we're going to find the least common number that they have, which means the number that's closest to the left that they both have. Notice how the number that they both have that's closest to the left is 10. They both have 22, but 20 isn't the closest number to the left. So that means 10 is their lowest common denominator. So that means we have to make them have a denominator of 10. How can we make 4 over 5 have a denominator of 10? We have to multiply it by a number that makes 5 10. And an easy way to find this number is to look at the chart. Notice how for the row that has 5 in it, 10 is correlated with the number 2. So that means we're going to multiply it by 2. And since we multiplied the denominator, we have to multiply the numerator as well. Since the second fraction already has a denominator of 10, we can leave it alone. But if we did want to multiply it, let's take a look at the chart. For the row with 10 in it as the first number, 10 is correlated with the number 1. So that means we're going to multiply it by 1. But notice how 3 times 1 is still 3, and 10 times 1 is still 10. So that means the fraction stays the same. 4 times 2 is 8, so that's going to be our new numerator. 5 times 2 is 10, so that's our new denominator. The second fraction stays the same. Notice how these fractions have the same denominator now? So that means we're allowed to add the numerators together. 8 plus 3 is 11. and the denominator stays the same. So that means 11 over 10 is our final answer. Let's try another problem. How can we add these two fractions together? Notice how the denominators are different. So let's make a chart. Let's start with 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's stop here. The first number is going to be the denominator, which is 4. And now we're going to add it to itself. So 4 plus itself, which is 4, is 8. Plus 4 is 12. And plus 4 is 16. Now let's take the second fraction's denominator, which is 6. 6 plus itself is 12. And then we're going to add it by itself, which is 18. And then we're going to add it by itself again, and that's 24. Now, between these two rows, what's the least common number? What's the number that's closest to the left that they both have? That number is 12. They both have 12, and it's the closest to the left. So we have to make these denominators 12. What should we multiply 4 by to make it 12? If we look at the chart for the row with the number 4, notice how 12 is correlated with the number 3. So that means we're going to multiply this by 3. Now let's take a look at the second fraction. The row with 6 in it has 12 that's correlated with the number 2. Notice how 12 is in the second column. So that means we're going to multiply it by 2. And whenever we multiply the denominator, we have to multiply the numerator. So keep that in mind. Five times 3 is 15. And the denominator is 4 times 3, which is 12. For the other fraction, 5 times 2 is 10. And the denominator is 6 times 2, which is 12. Notice how these two fractions have the same denominator now? So we're allowed to add them together. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the numerators and we're going to add them together. 15 plus 10 is 25. So our answer is 25 over 12. This is our final answer. Let's try this problem, except this time we're going to use another method. Sometimes it might be easier just to multiply the denominators by each other. This will make sure that the fractions have the same denominators. But sometimes what happens is that the final answer is going to be overcomplicated, but we can simplify that. So let's multiply this denominator by the other fraction's denominator, which is 3. And since we're multiplying the denominator, we have to multiply the numerator as well. And for this fraction, let's multiply this denominator by the other fraction's denominator, which is 5. And now we have to multiply the numerator as well. Notice how we multiplied the denominators by each other. 3 times 3 is 9. And the denominator is 5 times 3, which is 15. Four times 5 is 20. The denominator is 3 times 5, which is 15. And notice how these denominators are the same. Since the denominators are the same, we're allowed to add the numerators together. 20 plus 9 is 29. The denominator is 15, so that's going to stay the same. So fortunately, this fraction doesn't need to be simplified. So this is our final answer. Now what if we wanted to subtract fractions instead of adding? The process is the same, except we're subtracting the numerators instead of adding them. But first we have to make sure the denominators are the same. Notice how the denominators are different. So we're going to find the lowest common denominator. So let's start with the first number, the second number, the third number, and let's just stop here. Now we're going to fill in the denominators. The first number is going to be 2, and we're going to add it by itself. So 2 plus 2, which is itself, is 4. 4 plus 2 is 6. And now let's take the second denominator, which is 4, and we're going to add it by itself. 4 plus itself, which is 4, is 8. And 8 plus 4 is 12. So what's the smallest number that they have in common? The smallest number this row and this row has in common is 4. Both rows have 4. And 4 is the closest number to the left, so that means it's the least common denominator. So what do we have to do to make this denominator 4? Notice how for the row that has the number 2, 4 is in the second column. This is the column that 4 is in. So we're going to multiply this by 2. And since we're multiplying the denominator, we have to multiply the numerator as well. For the second fraction, the denominator is already 4, so we don't have to change anything. Five times 2 is 10. 2 times 2 is 4. And then minus the other fraction, which is 3 over 4. Notice how the denominators are the same now? So that means we're allowed to subtract the numerators. 10 minus 3 is 7. So the numerator is going to be 7. The denominator is going to stay the same. So our final answer is 7 over 4. Let's talk a little bit about negative fractions. If the numerator is -1 and the denominator is something positive like 6, the entire fraction is negative. But if the numerator is negative and the denominator is negative, the negative signs, they cancel out. So that means the final answer is positive 1 over 6. Now let's say the numerator was positive and the denominator is negative. If the denominator is negative, that means the entire fraction is negative. So the entire fraction is negative 1 over 6. Let's try one more problem. Let's say we had 2 over 3 minus 5 over 6. So notice how the denominators are different. So let's find the lowest common denominator. This is the first number, the second number, the third number, and let's just stop here for now. By the way, if the lowest common denominator doesn't show up, if the first row and the second row don't have a common number, it means you may need to add more numbers. So you might want to use 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on until it shows up. So let's take the first denominator, which is 3, and we're going to add it by itself. 3 plus 3, which is itself, is 6, plus 3 is 9. And now let's take the second denominator. We're going to add this by itself. So 6 plus 6, which is itself, is 12, plus 6, which is itself, is 18. What's the common number for these two rows? The common number is 6. So 6 is your common denominator. So what do we have to multiply this fraction by to get to 6? Notice how for the row that 3 is in, 6 is in the second column. It's correlated with the number 2. So that means we have to multiply it by the number 2. And since we're multiplying the denominator, we have to multiply the numerator as well. For the second fraction, since the denominator is already 6, we can leave it alone. What we have now is 4 over 6 minus 5 over 6. It turns out that the answer is going to be negative. So what we're going to do is the same thing as always. We're going to subtract the numerators. 4 minus 5 might be a little bit difficult to think about at first, so let's draw a number line. Let's start with 4 here, and then make our way down. So we're going to start at 4, and then we have to subtract 5. So we're going to go down 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And notice how we land at negative 1. So that means the numerator is going to be negative 1 over 6. Since the numerator has a negative sign, we can actually put the negative sign outside of the fraction. So what we have is negative 1 over 6. Since the numerator alone is negative, it means the entire fraction is negative. So that means our final answer is negative 1 over 6.